and welcome back to DevGameClub, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a sharp-dressed man who has too much time on his hands despite hanging out with Peter Gunn.
Tim Longo. Hello.
Hello. Do you have that? You got that reference?
I don't feel like it's on the tip of my tongue.
Wow. Those are the three songs played by the bands in the bar in Cremona. Yes, the cantina is a good way to put it. I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't get sued for their appropriation of music in that section, because they actually also appropriate the likenesses of the bands. Except for Styx, which they represent as green aliens. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. We are, of course, talking Space Quest 1. And yes, there's a little bit of licensed music. I actually went and looked that up because I was having a hard time identifying Peter Gunn. I recognized it. I'm like, oh God, what is that song? And I'm like, of course, it's a Blues Brothers song. I finally tracked it down. I had to look it up. There were multiple versions of the music that they stole to put in the cantina, depending on what version of the game you play, which is really funny. There's like a Madonna song that they used at one point.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
Yeah.
You mean in other
versions, like maybe the Amiga version or
weird,
or like the VGA remake or what have you. Yeah, it's a really funny thing.
Did you go back, just before I forget to ask, did you go back and press the do not press button?
I forgot to press the do not press button.
Oh, you kidding me? Well, I just have to tell you now, I guess.
Yeah, just tell me. It's probably best, because I probably won't at this point go back and do it. Yeah.
So you press that button, and I forget what the transition is exactly, like if it fades or what happens, but it cuts, and your spaceship lands in King's Quest 1.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, you land in the moat in front of the castle, and it's full of alligators.
That's hilarious.
It's like 20 alligators are there, and they give, and there's like even I feel like in the text there's a quote from Ken, like he says something about "get out of my moat" or something, or it's something. Yeah. So it's pretty. I thought it was pretty clever. I had totally forgotten.
It's not the only King's Quest mention actually in the game.
Oh, what was that? I don't remember the other.
There's on the ship. You can talk to the guards once you're in the Sarien uniform.
Oh, I didn't even try that.
You can, and they will say all kinds of inane things, one of which is remembering their vacation in Daventry or something like that.
Nice. Yeah.
So there is and then I actually think they literally say King's Quest 2 or 3 at some point. So whatever other game in that series was out around the time, or was coming out around that time. That was not uncommon in the day to have cross-pollination. That's a LucasArts thing as well. I think Secret of Monkey Island has Ask Me About Loom.
Yeah.
Grim Fandango has one as well, maybe Curse of Monkey Island. So good stuff.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, this game teaches you important skills like how to use your seatbelt, when to put it on and when to take it off, and when there's so many seatbelt thick moments, it's just like ridiculous somehow. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if this was around the time when, because we're both old enough to remember when seatbelts were not mandatory. Wasn't the law. I feel like it might have been a little later than this, but not a lot. Yeah, I just was, it's like one of those times when, any media, not just games, right? There's some, something going on in the world that is funny to people because it's become, it's changed in some significant way, and then people end up putting it into jokes. And I feel like that might have been around the same time. But anyway.
You might be right. I'm looking it up now while we're talking. Space Quest 1, 1986. California seatbelt law, 1986.
I nailed it.
Nailed it. It was made law at the very beginning of the year. So, and Space Quest came out later in the year, in October. So they had plenty of time to incorporate this. That is hilarious.
Yeah,
it's real world back in game world. Yeah, I mean, especially for adventure games, which often make jokes of whatever's topical. I mean, that's true of comedy generally, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
what is familiar and all that stuff. That is
nice pull. A lot of jokes about texting while driving right now and stuff like that, right? So
right. I mean, I'm far too young to remember seatbelt laws being enacted, but I've read about it on the internet, so it must be
in your history books. In
the history books. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, but I mean, I think as far as like where we left off, like one thing we were talking about in pre-show that I think we should hit is you were talking. I had inadvertently given you a hint last episode about the survival kit.
Yes,
and kind of I brought up the point and I made a note about it, and it happens a few times in this section that we played of there's a thing that you need that's sort of inside another thing, or there's sort of the double use conundrum for puzzle games that really, like, I would say typically is a rule you shouldn't break because it just is a usability nightmare. But you use the escape pod to get to Corona, but then it turns out you need something inside the escape pod. And so mentally,
and right outside it,
and right outside
it, yeah,
multiple purposes. And I think a lot of people get into their heads, right? It's like, okay, I use the escape pod to get to the planet, and then I'm done with the escape pod, so they just leave,
right?
And then not.
And one of the things it especially points out in the manual is like, look at everything. No, really, look at everything, and. It's interesting, especially, and I should have picked up on this, but in games, faster than I did, but in a game developer who uses time as a mechanic in adventure games, which was unusual at the time, I'm surprised I didn't think that it would matter when you looked at a thing.
Right.
So if you look at the escape pod when you're in the hangar bay or whatever, and it's a escape pod, regulation escape pod or whatever it would say, right? It's only once you've crash landed that the survival kit, which is something
I didn't even think of that.
You mentioned it kind of in passing, like, and you find the survival kit and blah, blah, blah. And when I was mixing the podcast last week, I was playing through to get the show notes and I heard survival kit. I mean, normally I don't listen to you, but I'm listening especially because, I'm doing the production. And I heard that and I went, I didn't do that. I missed that. And I had noted when I had finished playing for the stream that I felt like I didn't have things that I needed in order to order to progress. Like if I went down underneath to the pool with the acid and all that stuff and went to the beams, I didn't have something to deal with that, and somebody had told me that. But I also didn't feel like I had something to deal with Orat, I think his name was, the alien.
Yeah.
And turned out you gave me the clue of a thing I didn't have. So
right. Yeah. I just and then the other example that happens later that we talked about was sort of getting the uniform on the Sarien ship and then having an ID card inside the uniform. So I mean, it's fair that they tell you to look at everything, but especially your point about the timing of the survival kit, I just assumed in my head that it was available even when you get right into it. I don't know why they would have changed that, but I guess actually no. Now that I mention it, or now that I say that, I feel like there's some text I vaguely remember where they say a survival kit was dislodged.
Right.
On
they specifically say it was knocked loose. Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Yeah. So it wouldn't have been available.
It wouldn't have been. You didn't notice it. Maybe it was behind a panel or whatever. I mean, they
cover themselves a little bit on that, but it's just like, okay, look at everything, but there's nothing in the other ships. You go in multiple ships.
Right.
And I don't know. So I get it.
A bit of a stretch, but I mean, at the same time, sometimes you can, in the same location. Now that I was like, how am I going to find this kit that he mentioned? I also looked at the glass, which I don't think I did before. I think I would have remembered it, but I looked at the glass from inside, and the parser basically gave me a hint because it said, "You do not possess that item," and I went, "Oh." Oh, so clearly there's a way to possess an item that is a glass, which is funny. That's just that actually feels like a bug that was a temporal bug they didn't fix. Like, look glass before you can get glass, before you have glass shouldn't say that it should say something else. And maybe that's the sort of thing a pizza orgy probably would pick up.
Have you described what a pizza orgy is before? You can't just throw that out there. And
I feel like astute listeners should listen back to interview with Tim Schaefer and Dave Grossman.
Oh, maybe it was in Tim. Yeah, maybe it was.
Yeah, we talked about it then. But no, I mean, I'll quickly recap. So LucasArts, they would basically
play test.
They bring everybody in the company who would come and give them free pizza. That was the enticement. Come play the game that is totally broken and buggy, and we'll give you pizza. And based on what George paid at the time, that was a good deal. Ooh, burn. And so you'd come, you'd eat pizza, you'd play the game, and Tim or whoever the project leaders and designers and whomever they could get to watch players, they'd watch you play, see what you tried that they didn't think of, see what you got stuck on, basically try to play test the adventure game, and then see the things that people, and then after they'd played, ask them, oh, why did you try this, and get the thought process, and maybe even get some new content out of that. Like, oh, people are going to think this, so I should make sure I write a gag specifically to pay off on the fact that they thought that. So it's sort of a way to take the big matrix of X things that you have in your inventory against Y things they might interact with in the environment, and get payoffs for all of them, at least for the ones that made sense to the people who were playing them at the so-called pizza orgy. So
it's early playtests before.
Yeah, it's a much cleaner experience than really it sounds, but it sounds a lot greasier than it really was. But anyway,
well, and also at LucasArts, at least it was also sort of an unofficial milestone, right? Like you would get a project to a state, and you'd say, okay, we need to get to a point where we can have a pizza orgy where we can, get people playing it. So let's make the builds ready for that. So it was kind of a cool casual playtest milestone. And of course, these days, there's a lot more process and official scientific versions of that. But
and there's also, with Crunch, there's a lot more pizza.
Right. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Anyway, but you kind of knocked loose a lot of the things that were blocking me by making me examine that, because I also found the glass through the sort of parser glitch. I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. And I found the kit because you kind of made me think about where might I find a kit, and the escape pod was the only place that made any sense. And from that, actually, I found I got through the rest of that pretty straightforwardly. But you mentioned, so Orat is that alien that turns you into a basketball in the cave. And you had mentioned that although there's a way with the survival kit's contents to kill Orat, there's another way to do that. Could you go into that?
Yeah, because after like I said with King's Quest, and after I played this one, I went to go look at the point because I wanted to see what points I missed. And apparently you can lure, because I didn't do this. I always used the water to solve that. I thought it was the only way, but apparently you can somehow lure the spider droid into the cave, and he will detect the motion of Orat and then go and destroy Orat and himself, and then you can get the body part that way. But I guess you have to hide or something. You have to stand in a way where the droid doesn't get you. But I think you get extra points for that version versus the other version, which is just throwing the can. And I always, destroy the droid the way that you said in pre-show by pushing the rock onto it.
Right.
So they always thought that was what you're supposed to do.
Well, and I felt really good about it because it chases you all, and it's a great moment. It is, although when I had to replay it because I hadn't gotten the cartridge off the ship, that darn droid would not find its way to the spot on the screen.
Yeah,
it's a really weird, and that I want to kind of segue into the things that I didn't like about this section. The first time I played it and got the droid, it was amazing because it just happened the perfect way. It didn't take long. It got right to there, and I felt super powerful. Like, oh, I did the right thing. And
the randomness worked for you.
Yeah, the randomness was great. Yeah, in fact, I didn't interpret it as random. I interpreted it as, they coded it to do this because they thought I understood what the puzzle was, right? And they helped me to solve it, even though it's kind of timing based. But I think there are problems with some of this real time stuff that doesn't work out real well, and then is especially bad in the skimmer sequence, which is basically an arcade segment, which I hated. I will say,
you got to save a lot. It's like, you know what it reminded me of, the Beanstalk section.
Oh yes, exactly.
It's like one.
And Anachronox actually had the same problem, although Anachronox let you just skip it. It just said, you failed at this twice. Do you want to skip it? Because it's just it's just for fun. It doesn't matter.
You know what I remember doing in that section back in the day, and I did it this time too. I just go to a full one side of the screen, left or right, and I just keep it there, and then I just save over and over again when I make some progress.
Well, I've got a pro tip for you.
Oh, really?
Change the speed of the game to slow.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
It totally works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Gives you a lot of extra time to react. When you're years old, I mean, you need a little more time. So
it's very unforgiving. Like it is.
No, it's terrible. I mean, it fails after like 5 times, but it's so fast that it just doesn't work. And then the other thing that we talked about pre-show was there's a gambling mini game which is critical path and is random.
But you can save.
You can save, right? I mean,
if you get good at
I saved right before the droid because I missed it once. I was like, oh, great, I should have saved. I have to redo this part. So yeah, I mean, the ability to liberally save is something we talked about last time, that you can sort of save scum your way a little bit more here, which is kind of nice. Did we talk about that next time? It might be an email coming up today. But save scumming, I mean, it kind of encourages it, this game.
Yeah, we talked.
Yeah, we did. I mean, it's just like, why? What a weird.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's weird. It's unnecessary, and you can see, trying to probably they wanted to try to stretch the genre a bit and adding in, to add in some mini games, right? And if you can imagine sort of like the shop talk around the studio back in those days, because they're all working on, Ken is credited in this game, so everyone's playing everything and working on everything, I'm sure. And so they probably, after shipping King's Quest, they're probably thinking to themselves, are there ways to add in some other mechanics and things in there just for fun, and they just hit on a couple that weren't maybe the wisest, but there's this, I don't know.
They kind of fit in with what was on Apple IIs and what have you of the era, right? Or IBM PC. So it would have been the sort of thing that you could get a demo disc or something that had, or a disc with like 100 games on it, but they're all simple games, like, oh, here's a slot machine and here's a simple. I mean, one of the first games I ever programmed that wasn't specifically a text adventure was like a skiing game, where you ski down the downhill and you basically have to avoid obstacles with walls. I mean, it's basically the skimmer game, but going in the opposite.
So you made a skimmer game yourself. So you're to blame for.
No, mine was better.
Oh,
they should have stolen mine because mine was actually good. But it goes top down. And, anyway, it was all text. So I guess maybe it was just the art thing that they messed up. I don't know. Perspective was not good. But I mean, those are the sorts of things that I could see basically looking like, well, what could we implement quickly? Here's, what's out there. And, these are the things that are out there. You could quickly do a slot machine game. I sort of get it. But from a gameplay perspective, both of those are bad.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's sort of distractions, right? And I feel like the slot machine... I feel like
you call them distractions, but that is way too kind because they're critical path.
Yeah, that's fair. Distractions maybe not the right word. It's more of like a variety, right? Gameplay variety.
Okay.
To mix it up. But I feel like when I started doing the gambling again, the slot machine, I kind of recall thinking this back then too, that it's a critical path kind of bloated thing to add in just for the gimmick of if you get 3 skulls. You know what I mean? It's like, isn't that hilarious? There's a slot machine that you die from, or something like that. So, and I think back in the day I got stuck on it because I don't believe, I think I thought to myself, I couldn't believe that they would require me to gamble all the money. So I think in my head, I was thinking,
I made a note, encourages gambling.
Yeah, right. Well, that, but also like, I feel like as opposed to say LucasArts being the competitor, money would be more of a lock and key puzzle than it would be actually gambling, literally, getting your money to, to get more money from gambling. It'd be more of like you'd have to trick the, the guy that loads the money into the slot machine to give you the money instead. Yeah,
you'd have to like something to the walnut shell so you could see that the P was under that one or whatever.
Right. So it's something like, so it's just kind of a different, I think, philosophical approach to puzzle design, and such. So, but let me segue into my story that I mentioned last.
Oh God, yes, I've been waiting for this because I'm hearing this for the first time too. So,
yeah, so this is my most, and this is a short story, but this is my most infamous getting stuck in any game of all time. Because, like I said, it could have been a year, up to a year that I was stuck on it, and I'd go back to it from time to time, and I was basically stuck in this area. I forget the name of it.
It's
what's
Eulance Flats.
Eulance Flats.
Try to switch those around.
Flats, Eulance. Never got that.
Oh my God, we are 30 years on, and you're just now getting
the
joke.
I'm still getting that. Yeah, I'm the dense one. We've already established that last episode. I would never. Okay,
let's hear about the bar in you. I can't even believe it. Oh my God. Okay, let's hear about the bar in Eulance Flats.
No, I never got that. That's so funny. All right, good for me. And I love fart jokes. They're my favorite kind. Anyway, so I would just be going around the flats, like trying to figure things out, and what's going on, and I couldn't get off the planet. I think I basically had every piece that I needed, and what it ended up being is the coordinates or the sector, right, from the bar.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being so depressed because I just was been playing in this freaking area for so long, and I have everything I need to leave, but I can't figure out what to do. And so I just sat down at the bar and just depressed. I was like, screw this game. And so I just kept buying drinks and drinking them just out of spite and just like in this weird depressed state, like I was actually in a bar drinking as a kid, you know what I mean? And just pounding them down. And then that ended up being the solution. And I didn't even think of it as a thing to be the solution. And then the guy just starts talking about the sector and about where, and I was like, what's happening? What is happening? Oh my God.
Am I seeing? Oh my God. Am I really drinking? Am I imagining this?
Yeah.
Coincidentally, 1986 is the year that they raised the drinking age from 13 in California.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not true.
It's a
permissive state, but not that permissive.
I just remember this mental state that I was in of like, I literally felt like I was going to the bar to drink my worries away and just depressed. And I thought I was being funny and clever by just going to the bar and drinking as a kid, or as a teenager. And then it ended up being the solution.
No, it's funny because I got through that puzzle pretty quickly because I assumed there was a wish fulfillment element of, this game is marketed to, when it came out, it would have been marketed more towards teens. And I'm thinking, okay, well, the thing that the teens want to do is drink. And it actually specifically points out like that there's a space at the end of the bar or something like that. The bartender goes over there, another weird timey thing. Every now and again, he goes and you can talk to him and he says, it's 2 buckazoids or whatever for a drink. So it actually didn't hang me up. So it's funny hearing that it hung you up.
Well, it's one,
but I also totally get it. But who
knows, right?
Yeah.
I get hung up in weird places. And the other one that I wanted to mention that's back in the previous section in the caves that I remember hanging me up, and I didn't remember until we started playing again, was that I think I would consider a bit of a usability problem. The grate with the tentacle monster
yes.
down there. There's sort of almost like a new verb that's introduced there that you really, and it's kind of cool because when you get up to that edge, up at the, with your back against the wall there, and you do kind of the shimmy sidle along the way, and he changes his animation, and you kind of get this nice little custom moment. But you don't think that you can do that kind of thing, or that would make a difference. And so I remember being stuck there as well.
I lucked into that, actually.
Oh, really?
I just happened to go up that way, and it snapped into that position. I was like, oh, it was totally random. In fact, I think I even did that on stream. Yeah, because I had gotten past that. I had figured out the rock and the geyser and all that stuff. That part is not super intuitive. I love that they change the state and they make the character do something different, but it's also whenever they make the character do something different, you have no way to know that the character
there's no rule set around it. Yeah, there's no training or teaching. Later on when you use the jetpack, I thought that was a cool moment too,
yes.
Just to state change stuff. And to take a step back, one thing I wanted to mention too, that the escape pod reminded me of that I have in my notes. The one thing I did appreciate about this game versus King's Quest, and I remember this at the time as well, they spent time providing you with different perspectives, meaning there's almost like a cockpit first-person view or over-the-shoulder view, right, when you get inside that cockpit.
Right.
And I think at the end, too, they did that again. Or no, maybe it's just that one time. But then you crash, you know what I mean? And it's just this really, it goes back to my point before of just this sense of exploration, you know what I mean? And especially with Space Quest, because you go planet hopping for, ship to planet to ship in so many diverse areas. So that fantasy of fulfillment was really there. And I remember really loving that back when I played it versus King's Quest, though it had the open world feel to it, and there was a sense of exploration. This one just felt much more like a grand adventure to me. Yeah, well,
and I think it's also encouraged by a lot of dramatic moments, right? That are somewhat cinematic, at least as far as they could do at the time. You have the exploding ship at the beginning. You have the exploding ship at the end, which is kind of nice bookending. And then you get the total rip-off of Star Wars and getting the medallion at the very end. There's any number of these sort of moments. Oh, and then one that's really actually stark and dramatic is when you get the alien projected head something talking to you that you have to have translated. That's a really good moment. And then you have that's a good callback. That's totally like
what's that one episode with
I think it's the Quartermite maneuver. I think it's that one.
I don't remember the names. Yeah,
Corbomite, something like that. I think it's that one where you have that projected face. It's totally like that. And then even ending that, they open up this big stark white triangle on the screen that you have to walk through.
Yeah,
all really neat. That's really well done, and does, I think, those sorts of moments which don't really exist in the King's Quest game really lend that adventurous feel. I think that's a really good point. I appreciate that.
And I think you said it well with the cinematic word as well. I think that's a good descriptor because they definitely obviously were riffing off of the space opera movies of the time and shows, and so they were trying to get that fantasy of fulfillment, but they were able to kind of mush them all together in interesting ways. And I don't know, I just have that part of the nostalgia for me is really deep. So it was fun replaying it. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? No,
I can tell you the other place I got stuck. The one place I had to get a hint in these two games.
Oh yeah, you should talk about that. Yeah, which
It's a weird thing. So so the order in which I did things, and I apparently this is not the only order because Tim did it a different way, but I went in and I immediately spent some of my money that I got trading the skimmer. Oh, and that's actually another thing that happened to me. Let me diverge into that for a moment, because I found this when I went looking for the coupon issue. Apparently, the guy who offers to buy your skimmer will make 2 offers, and you need to get the second one. So what happened to me was DOSBox basically helped me there because I never saw the first offer because I was trying to type talk man or something like that and hit enter. And when I hit enter, it got rid of his first offer because he reached me. So it was just a weird timing thing the way I played it. That I never saw his first offer. I didn't know there was a second offer. I actually just...
So you thought his second offer was the first offer?
Exactly. I thought I had just missed it, and I went off screen and came back.
Lucked out.
Yeah, I totally lucked out. That was just a random...
Because you could get all the way through that without the jetpack.
And then you'd be screwed.
And then you're... Yeah.
So, and you'd have no idea why. Again, you'd be at a place where you'd be like, I don't know what's wrong. So I got totally lucked out there. But then I walked into the bar, having sold it and had 30 Buckazoids or whatever, and I did the drinking thing. And then I just played this stupid gambling game until basically the gambling machine broke. And as it turns out, if you do that, you end up with exactly 250, I think, Buckazoids. Which is just enough to buy the ship you want and not enough to buy the droid at full price that you need, the pilot droid. And
you also have to spend money to... Oh, you drank first.
I drank first.
Yeah, and then drank afterwards, and I had to spend money doing that. I don't know if that... Yeah, anyway, continue.
So I went up to the guy, and he says it's like 45, and I'm like, I only have 36, but it says it's 36 with a coupon. So I'm like, oh, no problem. I'll just go find the coupon. And I scoured.
I forgot about this.
I scoured Ulan's Flats, looking everywhere. And I looked in the pile of crap the dust basically that was the disintegrated. But I looked at every ship. I looked at other droids. I looked at everything. And finally I was running. I mean, it was getting late last night, and I was like, okay, well, I finally got to the point where I have no idea how much game there is left. I really need to move on. And I went and looked it up, and it turns out you need this coupon, as I said. The original game, as part of the stuff that was in the box, shipped with 2 blue printed coupons for this Droids R Us.
I hope I still have them. I think I do.
And you can mail me one. But they were actually in the box. So the player had them all the time. Yeah, and that was the leap you were supposed to make of like, oh, I already have this thing, because it doesn't show up in Roger Wilco's inventory, but you already have it. So you just have to buy the thing, and he gives you the lower price, which is all I needed. Oh, yeah. It drove me. I had no idea. I was so lost. And it didn't occur to me to try to buy it anyway. And I didn't even think of that because it said, you need this.
Funny.
You need this thing to make the price this. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, adventure game. Let me go find this thing that I need. This lock for this key, or this key for this lock, rather. So
all the signs were there. But this was also in the era, which I think we talked about with Day of the Tentacle, of gimmicks in boxes, right? Mm. Like whether it be the decoder.
Usually they were copy protection, in a way. All
sorts of weird stuff, and just they were having fun with what came in the box, and that was another example. And now that you mention it, I feel like that was an MO of Sierra in general. Like I feel like Police Quest came with some policey thing, and
I'm sure it came with like procedures and regulations or something.
I think that there just was the cogs, as they say, or whatever. Were really interesting because people were having fun with it, So, that's so funny. God, I'll have to go when we unpack. I'll have to go and find and see if I think I still have those coupons. I'll send you one. Then you'll have it forever.
Oh, thank goodness.
You'll never forget.
I'll have it for the next time I play Space Quest. In the meantime, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some takeaways and a bunch of feedback.
Yeah.
Welcome back from the break. We'd like to do as we normally do when we round these off. And this is kind of a weird one because we've done 2 games and we've done them quickly, and we already did some takeaways. But we'd like to turn now to some takeaways specifically from Space Quest and talk about that. How about you take the first one, sir?
Yeah, the one of the ones for me that I really appreciated was compared to, say, King's Quest, because I think it was really interesting for me to play them back to back, because it was all in my vague memory, and I just couldn't remember the structures. But I love the sense of kind of beginning, middle, and end, as we talked about at the break, and the sense of a story arc, as Brett said, and that you were really kind of going through this adventure and journey, and that kind of it fit well with a space theme because of that kind of planet hopping and spaceship hopping kind of mentality. But I love that I felt like I was really going, on this journey in a linear way, versus King's Quest is cool in this weird wraparound open world kind of way, but it's things can happen in various orders and the pacing is different, right? And there isn't this sense of progress in the same way, because you're kind of always in the same land, and you don't really, you go to some sub areas, but you're not really going across the galaxy like this. And so as far as like hitting that fantasy fulfillment, I thought that was really cool. And I remember it blowing my mind back then too, and that's a segue to my second one. But why don't you go for your first?
Well, I mean, to reinforce that, I mean, this thing has a definite Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 coda or epilogue, and that really comes across. And of course, because they're borrowing so heavily from Star Wars, it matches along that pretty well. Mm-hmm. One of the things I really appreciated, especially in a comedy game, I think it works this way because you are, as we talked last time, kind of the zero. Your player and your character are very aligned in terms of what you know about the world. And that was one thing that I found a little frustrating about King's Quest, is that there was an expectation of player knowledge that I wasn't immediately able to match with. I mean, ultimately it sort of came back, but 10 years from now, I bet it wouldn't have. I bet I'd have no idea. So if I were a little older, a little more distant from reading, fairy tales to my own kids, and much more distant from reading them myself when I was a kid. So here you've got
much, much more distant.
Yeah. Thank you. I was around for the Grimm brothers.
Sure. And that's what I'm saying.
I'm the fourth Grimm. The sort of dropping into a world and basically having them have to tell you everything about it really worked well, both for me as a player, but it also matched well with the character. And I thought that was really elegantly done here in a way I didn't think came across as well in King's Quest because of that sort of expectation of knowledge. Like you can actually imagine Space Quest translating well to a foreign culture in a way that I don't think King's Quest could. Like you could send Space Quest to Japan, for example. And they could.
The logic is right, a little more universal.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. But having to know these specific Eastern European fairy tales in King's Quest wouldn't work as well, I think. So that was the first thing that really struck me with this one. You had a follow on to your own first point.
Yeah. But to piggyback off what you were just saying, I feel that's what we would call cognitive dissonance these days, right? That's the term we use, I feel like, in design terms these days, of sort of like when that isn't achieved, right? With your avatar and the player, and when those are in in conflict with each other, we would call that cognitive dissonance, I believe.
You mean ludonarrative dissonance?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I guess
it's not really. It's really
ways.
Just dissonance. Yeah. There's a different sort of dissonance here, which is right. The expectation of me as a player versus what the character would know or whatever.
Yeah, the motivations.
Really kind of a separate thing.
Yeah, ludonarrative is slightly, they're related, but anyway, that's something that we talk a lot about when it comes to, especially narrative development, but logic development for your player character and your person as a player. So anyway, that's a good topic for lots of stuff. I'm sure people hit that all the time. So my related topic to my first one was just the sense of which I think Brett said before the break, that sense of cinematic presentation, I guess that's how I'd summarize it from Brett's comments, and especially coming from King's Quest, where I don't think they did that really maybe at all, but I guess they had a scene with the king kind of, but
right, that's really the one.
It's the one time.
One time, yeah.
But I just remember getting into the cockpit of the escape pod for the first time and seeing it from that perspective, with that sort of like that, literally that perspective of the framework of the cockpit kind of going off into the horizon. And it felt very Star Warsy and just like blowing my mind of like, wait, I'm sitting in the cockpit right now. I'm looking at the back of my helmet, that kind of stuff. And they do that a few times. And they just change perspective in interesting ways. And just even the crash land of the escape pod on the desert just felt so cool, and I just appreciate that they were being more cinematic with the game in general. And LucasArts definitely did a better job of that overall, I think, over their history. That was definitely seemed like a goal that they were going after differently, but the Space Quest games specifically over the series as they go sequel by sequel, they get even more elaborate with that stuff. So that was something that I really loved.
Yeah, no, I joked with you in between while we were off mic about playing all these games, and that's all I'm going to play forever. But I do think I might look at the other Space Quests a little bit more, at least the other couple I bought through GOG as a package for this one.
2 and 3 come with it.
I'm kind of curious to see how it evolves. I'll probably hunt down a hint guide so I can kind of go through them quickly and not be as challenged, but I'm just kind of curious. It's always interesting, and we don't typically do a lot of sort of a whole series of something. It might be something we do someday. I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah, we could do that over a couple different months.
Yeah, it's kind of curious to see how something evolves specifically. But I am personally curious with Space Quest to see, especially after your comments, like how did they do this better, and what did they add, and what opportunities were there for them? Yeah.
And of course, it's Roger Wilco the whole time, which is cool. Another little anecdote I forgot to mention is in my family, even today, we still use buckazoids as our general term for currency, general currency term. That's just because it was just, it bled into our consciousness of our family back in those days because we were obsessed with it. So,
wow.
Yeah, buckazoids.
What a group of nerds.
Yeah, well, my dad's a huge Trekkie to this day.
I guess so.
Yeah.
We prefer Trekker.
Right. Good point. He would have corrected me as well.
I'm sure he would have. I'm totally your dad, your podcast dad.
Oh, geez.
So my final point is something I talked about a bit last time. I won't belabor it here, but I really appreciated the sense of exploration you got in this game, from splitting the screens to accessible versus non-accessible areas, or even just the sort of the elevation, especially in the desert sections with the cliffs and things like that you could get to, and you could sort of see it. It happens in the spaceships as well, but I think it's particularly well done on Corona, where you can see, oh, look, I can see these cliffs up there. I don't know how to get up there. You find a way to get up there, and then you can, through that sort of separate connectivity, find your way to some new exploration goal. And it's something that I think adventure games I don't want to say adventure games because it sounds like the genre, but I mean games in which there is a sense of adventure. It's really useful to sort of foreshadow visually for the player, oh, here's a thing that you can see and you know that you can get there. You just haven't figured out how. I mean, I mean, that's a thing that we feel in Skyrim. Like when we were talking about that and designing it, it's like, oh, there's this giant mountain that you can see when you come out of the first gate and you can go there, right? Anything you can look at, you can go there, right? I mean, that's kind of part of the sense of adventure that those games are meant to engender. And this is maybe the earliest I've ever seen that. And so it feels like it deserves special notice for that. It may not be the first ever, but it's certainly the first.
Oh, it's early. Yeah, I think
it's very early. I can't remember another obvious.
Well, I think that sense of almost level design and just world composition, I guess, maybe, that sense of landmarks, like you said, and having that goal to set and then figuring your way through it. That's something that we still need to do in level design today. And the Bethesda games are a great example of that because everything's open. And so you have to draw their attention and lead them that way without having to handhold them. And it's interesting that it showed up in this game in interesting ways. And then the split screen part of it too is really, really, really crazy.
I mean, I love the mystery of it, right? And I think that's a thing that,
like, what's that up there? Especially where the elevator is.
Exactly.
It's alien, and you're like, what is that?
Right. It's clearly made. It's a made object of some kind, and you're just, what's that going to be? This is before Stargate, I'm pretty sure, but I mean, it made me think of Stargate as well. So. It feels very Star Trekian. I think we talked about that too. That alien race itself felt like a it's like the City on the Edge of Forever, actually. That which is the one where he goes back in time, but they basically step into a device that's sort of if you squint, maybe looks a little bit like that. So I think it recalls that a little bit, for sure. In this case, the City on the Edge of Forever is actually underground, I guess, that they take you to or something like that. It's a weird thing. We've mentioned a couple Star Trek references here, so I'm not surprised that
you are my dad.
Oh man, I'm telling you.
That's the anecdote there is, as is probably evident from the audience already, that I was the Star Wars guy in the house, and he was the Star Trek guy in the house. So we always had that healthy tension. But he's the one that recall. Yeah,
you and me.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm telling you, City on the Edge of Forever. It's got Joan Collins. It's amazing. What an episode.
Sure. Well, let's talk about Jar Jar.
Yeah, I guess I won on that one. I got Joan Collins. You got Jar Jar.
I just leaned into that.
I'll take that bet.
A little anecdote though, for if you do end up playing any of the other ones, 2 or 3, I think it's 2. The individual that wrote the logs on the cartridge that you find about the star generator is an important individual for later. So,
oh wow,
yeah, it's kind of a neat, and I actually totally forgot about that until playing this time and reading what's on the cartridge. It's kind of like in a log kind of format, right? I think he's talking about what to do, and that's how you get the code and stuff. But that character comes up later. So I thought it was cool that they utilize that little tidbit in the sequel. So,
oh, nifty! I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. All right. Well, I guess what we'll do now is then turn to feedback. We sort of haven't really come to conclusions about what's happening next week, so keep an eye on Twitter and stuff like that, and we'll try to get to you. We don't really know. We have some suspicions, but we're thinking about it. We might also have some bonus episodes coming up, so we're not committing to anything just yet while our schedule hashes out. In the meantime, we do have some email I did want to call out. We have a few, but you can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love your feedback. We love to read it. We also love your reviews. We don't have any of those this time. You can throw those up on Apple Podcasts, and I will find them. In the meantime, let's go to email. I gave you the first one, sir.
Yeah, so subject is question, exclamation point, by Derek Ahoy.
Achoy? Yeah,
Achoy? Yeah. Hey, Tim and Brett, really enjoying this trip back to the origins of the adventure game. Playing King's Quest IV with my sister and dad is one of my earliest memories of gaming, and we all fondly remember dying in new and exciting ways on every screen. Yeah, that's one of their things. Anyway, I was wondering if you guys could comment a bit on the genre as a whole, what it does well and what it doesn't. It'd also be interesting to hear if you've played any of the more modern titles like Broken Age, Thimbleweed Park, and my personal favorite, Machinarium, and maybe talk about how the genre has evolved or hasn't and where it could go next. Thanks, as always, for the awesome podcast. Yeah, that's a good one. We could spend a whole
we could spend
on just that.
Those additional games. I mean, I've played Broken Age completely. And Machinarium a little bit, and Thimbleweed Park not at all, though it's been on my list since it came out. I've been meaning to get to it, and I probably will soon. It's on the Switch and stuff now, so I'm like, maybe a Switch game for me. But that will be probably those two, Broken Age and Thimbleweed Park, are certainly from the LucasArts lineage, right? It's Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert. Yeah. So those will definitely fall in line with those. I mean, I think the thing with Broken Age, there's a couple things that are strange. One, the split nature of the thing coming out in episodes, which also is a Telltale thing.
There's two different characters, right?
Two parts and two different characters with their own storylines, which at one point sort of intersect and cross over, which is kind of neat. That's pretty neat. I would say that like those two, well, I mean, I can't speak for Thimbleweed Park, but just from following the blog, it seems like those haven't necessarily evolved so much. I think Thimbleweed Park does a lot more with following different characters and things like that. That much I do know. And so there's maybe more bringing in of sort of cinematic techniques of following a different character when you want to introduce them and things like that, or maybe going back in time a little bit to sort of establish a character. I think there's some tricks like that it does narratively, again, having not played it yet, but from sort of pre-release coverage and the blog and stuff. Broken Age feels very traditional in the LucasArts style, and with Tim's great dialogue and wacky ideas. Machinarium's a different thing altogether. Have you played that at all?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I played that back when it came out and finished
which is a while back now, maybe 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, maybe that many. But they've been pretty consistent with releasing stuff. The name of that studio is escaping me.
Is it Samarost?
Yes, right. Yes. So they actually just had one come out. It starts with this CH, but it's not a full adventure game. It sounds like it has a little bit of more platforming to it.
I'm wrong. It's Amanita design.
Oh yeah, Samarost is one of their games. I think.
Right, that's right. Yeah, Samarost is one of their series.
1 and 2. Yeah.
Yeah, Chuchel is what you're thinking of.
Yeah, that just came out. So they're kind of they're out there right now. But Machinarium, yeah, I enjoyed. I think their strength is in particular is their art style and just kind of the being in their worlds. Their puzzles are pretty simple in general, and
highly nonverbal, actually, which is interesting too. And of course, they're I think an Eastern European developer, so
they are.
So they're not trying to compete on their like English writing ability and the comedy and stuff that we sort of think of it as the sort of staples of LucasArts or even Sierra games in some cases. I feel like their thing that I really appreciate is they're basically world builders. You know, they have these interesting rule sets with sort of the creature designs, and then you kind of have to learn. They do a pretty good job at teaching you some of those rule sets as you go, then utilizing those for puzzles down the road. So I think that's when it comes to like the question of like how have they evolved, I feel like that's one of the areas, and really I guess I would boil it down to just kind of pure usability that we've learned over the years. Not having made an adventure game myself, I can't speak to it in particular, but I feel like
in the Nintendo school of thinking that we've talked a lot about, of just being better at teaching people the rules as we go. And Brett mentioned that for Space Quest a lot. There's definitely a lot of not doing that back in the day.
Yeah.
And LucasArts did a little bit better job of that. But the other weird evolution that I think is weird, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it, but because Telltale has gotten so big, the emphasizing of puzzles is really a thing now, right? It's really focused more on story and dialogue trees and playing through, and maybe a little bit of weird action thrown in there. But Telltale has been so dominant. But because of that, the puzzles have been taking sort of a back seat. So I actually really want to play Thimbleweed Park because I think it's got kind of an X-Files thing going.
Right. Oh, it totally has an X-Files thing going.
Yeah, which I'm a huge fan of that and Ron. So that's
right.
one is on my list.
The other one to throw out there as far as that goes is Wajidai Games, which has supernatural elements, but they're very much sort of traditional adventure games. I mean, they could be in the Scum engine as far as I can tell, just looking at them. From Dave Gilbert, I believe is the sort of head of that company. And those are games that I haven't gotten around to, but I have a number of them in my ever increasing backlog that I want to get to. I just have not found the time. One thing that's nice about having a sort of RSI is that I can maybe go play some of these adventure games, which are a little less demanding on my wrists and elbows.
That's a good point. Another company that I want to call out, though, that I do consider adventure game, but I think they've kind of stopped making them, but they were on a track to kind of, I would say, innovate in the space. And that's oh man, the name of the company is escaping me again. But what is their mobile games? The first one is based on a Danish myth that is kind of a horror theme.
Yearwalk?
Yearwalk, yeah, Yearwalk.
Right, Simoji. Or
Simoji. Yep. Simogi or Simoji, yeah. But definitely, I'm sure people have heard of those, but if you haven't played those, Yearwalk and then Device
6, yeah. And even the Sailor's Dream has a lot of it sort of...
Oh, I haven't played that, actually. Is that from them?
Yeah, that's from them. It's a few years ago.
That's their last one, yeah. I think they're kind of taking a break, but Yearwalk I really enjoyed because it's kind of got this almost horror theme, but it's kind of very, very, speaking of grim fairy tales, it's kind of got that feel, but it's based on a Danish myth, I believe. Really interesting. And the puzzle design is kind of simple or whatever, but there's this sense of good exploration around the world. And then Device 6, I'm actually stuck on that one right now in one of the areas, but I'm pretty deep into it. And as far as like a really unexpectedly interesting, I guess I'd call it an adventure game. It's puzzly and really wild about, the core concept of the game and what they're doing differently. So anyway, I wanted to call those out.
That's a great rec because that is a Device 6 in particular. I haven't finished Yearwalk. I should probably go back to that one, but Device 6, that would have been in close contention for my game of the year.
It's really stellar.
Yeah. It is excellent. There's of course a million other things. There's Twine games, some of which are puzzly and some of which are not. I think they get a lot closer to the narrative. I also feel like visual novels oddly are
they're pretty popular right now.
Game, and they're adventure game feely in a way in that you're kind of puzzling out how to achieve the ending that you want. So they're a little bit different, but they do feel like an evolution in a way.
Telltale games are basically visual novels at this point, right?
They are, but I'd say they're even lighter systemically than a lot of visual novels are. So visual novels feel like these really deep systems with then these kind of unusual, often anime tinged, and I think that puts off a lot of people sort of fronts. So, those are a couple areas I feel like what we think of as adventure games have kind of moved towards. Like, it's basically a puzzle to figure out how do I romance this specific boy that I want to have be my boyfriend in a visual novel or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole thing. And that doesn't appeal to everybody, but I do think it's an evolution of the genre. So, I don't know that I have any specific areas that I'd take it. I would like to see more. I mean, I think visual novels take you in sort of the romance direction often, which is an underserved genre, sort of literary genre in our work, I think. I would like to see more comedy. I'd like to see more of that come back, to be honest. We're like more than a decade into grimdark. Please, somebody take me out. I'm willing to have something else. And I get where that comes from and why that's happened, but I'd also like to see more lighthearted fare. I think the Machinarium and other games from Amanita are kind of terrific that way, because they instill a sort of sense of wonder, and it's not really comedy necessarily, but they're often surprising, and that can sort of feel funny. I don't know. It can make you kind of chuckle in a way. I don't know. There's a lot to like there. There's also not a ton of horror adventure games. I'd love to see more of those. Mm-hmm. It's tough to do because it's hard to maintain tension when you're trying to figure out a puzzle and you're stuck. Like, goodbye tension. So that's a tough one, but something I like. So figured I'd put it out there. Somebody out there figure it out and send me a link. Okay, I have the second mail. This is from a longtime friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. His subject is Sierra Month. Hi, Tim and Brett. Holy guacamole. He's from Texas. A month of Sierra games. Like Tim, I was a Sierra kid, so this is awesome. And you're playing the OG text parser versions too? That is hardcore. I think I lived longer in the Souls games than those Sierra games, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Since you're going back in time for this one, I have a just for fun time travel question. If you could go back in time and claim any game as your own, what would it be? Ultima by Lord Longo? Brett Duville's Civilization? I would take a sports almanac back with me to build seed money for games that never got made. Call me, Tom Hall. Great show as always, and I leave you with a parting gift. So he sent, and I'll put a link in here, a special Sierra death screen, which was generated by an online generator, in which is nobody escapes Sierra games unscathed. Better luck next time, DevGameClub. So it's pretty good.
Nice. That's great.
And as another coda, he followed up with some more links that I will put in there. Some Space Quest promos and a weird docu-comedy thing. They're a little blurry and stuff, but they're pretty funny. So I'll put those into a bunch of YouTube links for Space Quest docs. So yeah. Anyway, what's the game you wish you could have put your name to?
Yeah, that's a really what a good question.
I mean, it probably for me would have been Ultima, to be honest. Looking back that far. For me, or Zork. I mean, one of the other. Brett Duville's Ultima, Lord Duville. It really has a ring to it.
Like I'll have to pick one, but I'll give a few quick ones. Like I like going back further, like Pitfall or Adventure are two games on the 2600 that I think have way more influence than people realize, and I would love to have been those folks. Half-Life definitely comes to mind. We've played it, and that one, just being a shooter fan, like that's just such an amazing game. Having played it for the cast, it's even more amazing now in my head than because we got to spend the time analyzing it. And then this is a funny one because we were so close to it, but Dark Forces. I wish I had worked on Dark Forces. It got me. I would say it's the game that really influenced me the most to get into the industry. And then I was lucky enough to be able to work with Darren and team after they, on other games. So that's Dark Forces that's a big one for me.
Well, that's a great game. It's a hell of a game.
Yeah.
Man, there are some great moments in that game.
Amazing.
Yeah. We will have to
someday.
Someday. Tempting. Okay. I have another one for you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So subject is cost rarity in game selection for cast play.
Oh yes, this is sort of a behind the scenes question, so I figured we'd tackle it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Jeff Bataccio, maybe Bataccio.
Yeah, sure.
Hey guys, big fan. Quick question: does the rarity scarcity of retro games play into your decision on which games to play for the cast? The question arose in the context of reading an excellent article on Panzer Dragoon Saga. And
a link. That's fine.
Yeah, no,
I'll put it in the show notes.
I know the infamy of that game as far as getting a copy of it. While the game ranks highly, if not first on all-time games list for the Sega Saturn, it has an extremely low print run at the very tail end of the Saturn's life. There's only the game fetches a very high price on secondary markets. Additionally, the game has never been released or remade for more current consoles, which makes options to play the game limited to a very high price of entry for procurement of game and console or emulation. I'm just wondering how this and other financial or technical limitations, such as digging out or procuring an old flight stick for TIE Fighter, factors into your game selection. Do the barriers of entry to some games automatically disqualify them for cast play? Thanks, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, we definitely we want, right, it's meant to be a book club, and we're not trying to read, oh, hey, you know what? This week, folks, we're going to read the Gutenberg Bible. There's 16 of them out there. Try to get a copy. Yeah, I mean, we're not trying. I mean, there's two reasons why we want things that are available. One is so that other people can play along. That's kind of the primary thing. We want people to be able to play along. But the other is, if something's really, really hard to get, it's probably not very influential, even if it was rated highly, because not many people have played it. I mean, I think there are exceptions to that rule. I think Eco was, I mean, it wasn't hard to get back in the day, but not a lot of people bought it. So it was a little bit rarer just from that standpoint, but a ton of game designers bought it. And see that. I think Panzer Dragoon Saga is one of those that actually doesn't really fall into that category. You know, it's certainly not nothing I've even seen ever. So it would be hard for us to pick that. But yeah, any thoughts from you?
No, I was just going to say, like, for his example of like procuring equipment, old equipment or whatever, like for when we played TIE Fighter, I actually bought a new stick for it.
So did I.
I didn't have an old one laying around. And then the funny thing for me lately, which I think I've talked about, is much to my wife's chagrin, I have actually decided to, whenever I can, play the game we're playing on its original platform. And so I've actually gone back and repurchased old consoles that I've long since gotten rid of. And now I have a box of them that I shouldn't have, just so I could play Mario 64 on the original N64 rather than on, say, the DS or something. So, yeah, so it's actually worked out in the opposite fashion for me. But yeah, what Brad already said, it still holds. Like we want to. I agree with his point about them. The ones that are out there are the ones that are out there on purpose. But also we hope that some people try to play with us, or at least dabble in it a little bit. And so we wanted to make it easy to get. But also, I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I'm not gonna go out and spend crazy money on things, even if it's some rare, crazy example of a game. I love the cast, but it is, there are limits.
Yeah, and it's a labor of love for us, right? We're not earning anything here, to pay for the games that we play. So it's if it's $1,000 to play this game, probably not going to happen. Sorry. I mean, one thing that I've gotten emailed before about, and you can send these in to devgameclub@gmail.com. Your recommendations is No One Lives Forever, or No One Lives Forever 2. And I'd love to play those on the cast, but the ownership of those are very much in dispute. Nobody really knows who owns it. And so bringing them back and making them available has basically fallen through the cracks. And although I have copies of both of those games, it's not possible to get legal copies of them. And that's kind of important to us. Because we're in the industry and we'd kind of like people to be out there actually buying the stuff that we work on. So we want to make sure we're also buying the stuff that we play or already have a copy. as in the case of Warcraft, which I think was difficult to find to play anymore, but we both had it. Anyway, so yeah, those are kind of the sort of back channel discussions we have about these sorts of things, like what's available and how does it tie in and things like that. But a high bar to entry is going to make it tough for us to choose it for a number of reasons. Okay, I have the last one here. It's from, this is like Steinar Nedrabo. Sorry, Steinar. I feel terrible. I have no idea.
You nailed it.
I nailed it. So there's a couple paragraphs. Big fan of the show, and it's been fun looking back at King's Quest and Sierra games. Also a child from the 80s and 90s from Norway. So excuse my pronunciation of your name. One game I especially recall was King's Quest V. My father used to travel to the U.S. for work and would sometimes bring back a video game for us. This particular time, he brought back King's Quest V, my first King's Quest, although 6 is my favorite. And I remember vividly this big and beautiful box art that had embossed gold lettering on it, like an ancient book of some kind. It seemed magical. Back then, I was perhaps only 5 or 6 years old, much like me, and could not yet read or understand English very well, much like Tim, but I was very much taken by its world, even though I had no idea how to progress in the game. I soon enlisted the help of my neighbors, this being pre-internet with no walkthroughs, and King's Quest games in particular being pretty unforgiving at times. Me and pretty much every kid on my street spent probably a year or so to beat this game. I recall vividly times when we would be 5 or 6 people clamored around the CRT monitor with hand-drawn maps in hand to navigate the desert to finally find an oasis before being killed of thirst, and how we'd all scream of joy of finally progressing. I especially remember the sound that emanated from the back of the chassis when a puzzle had been solved. And then there's some more sort of puzzles and details. Anyway, his question is, do you think there is something valuable to these infamous Sierra games features that can only be described as broken video game mechanics by today's standard? I'm referring to these instances where if you hadn't done things in a particular order, you could get stuck later in the game with no chance of progressing without restarting or restoring an older game, which made you save games often and on different slots. Is there any value to these kinds of mechanics, or is it something that can be only fondly remembered through the lens of nostalgia? I personally kind of miss when games were somewhat vague and obscure around their mechanics and rules, and you had to really get to know the game and all its kinks to progress. The satisfaction of beating some of these puzzles were immense that I haven't felt in games since. I guess this relates to the so-called hand-holding and what a good balance is. Would love to get your guys' opinion on this if possible. Thanks for all the hard work. Best regards, Steinar.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like my interpretation of the question, which I think, I guess my quick abstract answer is I do think there is value in a philosophical way, but I think what has occurred that I think, which I know we talk about quite a bit, and it's again, naming the Dark Souls once again, I think that kind of concept of risk versus reward and punishment and the opacity of how the game is going to work and the discovery and joy of discovering that on your own has just evolved over time into something like the Dark Souls of the world these days. And that's happening more and more in genres as we go. Being pretty deep into Breath of the Wild right now, they intentionally make certain things opaque. So when you discover them, there's a bigger sense of joy. I just think that those versions back in the King's Quest days and the Sierra days they just go too far, so I think a lot of it is memory for me, but that sense of joy, again, like I told my story about sitting at the bar, like I will never forget that moment when that guy started talking to the other guy while I was drinking my sorrows away, you know what I mean? And then it just, I don't remember what I did, but I'm sure I jumped out of my chair, and that wouldn't be possible without the just punishment of those things. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I could ever really defend the sort of like I missed a thing 2 hours ago, and had no idea. That's just hint book territory stuff.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, as long as that there's a point at which you understand that, oh, I missed a thing, I've lost because I missed a thing, I can start over. I mean, that's fine in a game that you could complete in 5 hours if you knew everything. I think,
but I mean, the using the cartridge as an example, you can miss the scientist that comes in to tell you about the cartridge.
Right, and that's not great. I mean? However, you can get to a later cartridge reader and go, oh, I should have a cartridge.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Do they let you leave? Do they let you? Yeah, I mean, I get it, but I think
I mean, there's other more practical reasons why it's not really possible to go back, and that's the internet.
Sure.
A game has to be ridiculously difficult to stymie the internet for any significant period of time. I mean, the Dark Souls games are a good example where it does take a while before people kind of piece everything together, and it's a great achievement to have done it. And ARGs, alternate reality games, which is something we talked about a show or two ago, are kind of another example of the same sort of thing. Like, you need a huge amount of sort of collective knowledge in order to surpass the various challenges in those, or at least that's the goal for ones that are done well. So I think that in general, however, especially if you want to have this sort of large market, you really need to be a bit more open. Just really just no getting around that. If you can make a game really, really cheaply, and that's possible, so it's not impossible, and it could kind of come back. But you also need an audience at that point who's willing to say, I'm not going to go and check this out online. And I actually think that is actually the rarer commodity these days than being able to design in this way, that you have these kind of crazy moments. I think the rare commodity is really, do people have the patience to not have a thing? I mean, we're in an on-demand culture these days, and we're often chasing that next experience and like, let me finish this so I can get onto that next thing. That's maybe always been true to games to some degree, but it has accelerated with the internet. So it feels like there's a lot of stuff working against the possibility. I like to think that the cast at least is kind of reminding people that there is value in this old stuff, and maybe it's okay to go back and not play with a hint guide and listen to us struggle and be like, you know what, that's okay, and that can be fun. It's a matter of taste, as we talked about in the very first episode of this sort of double game series. So anyway, those are kind of my scattered thoughts about the issue.
No, that's the point. Yeah, and I definitely, like I said up top, I do think there's value, because I think that journey, the player journey of finding that joy when you do successfully figure something out is untouchable. I mean, it's just such an important part of the loop of playing this stuff. And I think Sierra had their version of it for sure. And I think that my point was just, I think it is still there, and it's important, and it just needed to evolve. The other side of it is, I think, oh shoot, I'm forgetting my thought. What was the other side of it? Darn it.
What is the other side of that coin, Two-Face?
Yeah, dang it. Oh, it was going to be so good too. I'll think of it later, maybe, before we,
Oh, and that's in the true tradition of one of these old Sierra adventure games. You'll think of it later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Darn it. Lost it.
All right. Well, later epiphany to be delayed till next time.
Yep.
All right,
I'll add it in at some point.
Thank you, Steinar and Aaron and Jeff and Derek, for your emails. We appreciate them, and all the emails that we get.
I think I remembered it.
Go. Please.
So a minor trend that I think is kind of interesting, that I feel like I'm seeing, you tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm crazy on this, but when it comes to your point about the internet and kind of how do you hide not hide, but what does it mean when there is an answer to something that the internet can give you if you want to go search for it? I feel like I've seen this sort of minor trend where people, it really puts the onus back on the quality of the game. And if the game's good enough, I've noticed that people are starting to really force themselves not to go looking for the answer. You know what I mean? Because they want to experience it in a true sense. So it's sort of like, in a good way, putting the onus back on the developers to make a game that people don't want to have spoiled for them. You know what I mean? So they kind of black things out themselves. So they can experience it in a pure sense. I feel like I've seen some anecdotal examples of that recently, where people are. It's almost like a cultural shift. You know what I mean? Where it's like, yeah, of course the answer is out there if you want it, and it's really like literally seconds away if you really want it. But you're enjoying it so much that you choose not to.
Yeah,
versus before, where it's like you just couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'd say sort of in support of that is that some creators really get out there and try to make the point that no, that the proper way to experience this game is to figure it out yourself. And I specifically am thinking here of Jonathan Blow, which he really went out there and said with Braid first. I feel like it was part of the Witness as well, was part of sort of his discussion around that, although I think there's a lot more going around as far as the Witness goes. But with Braid in particular, I remember distinctly him saying, no, that this game is meant to be experienced alone and not by going and finding solutions on the internet. You have to, part of doing this is figuring it out. And part of it, getting the most out of this game, is figuring it out for yourself. I mean, I think that's, again, I think that's entirely possible when you've got a small team. With Braid, it was basically him, and he hired out for some art and music and sound and stuff. And then the Witness is a bigger team, but still small, very small by game standards. So, yeah, I mean, I think it depends, and I think there is always going to be some sort of audience for that. One of the things of this most recent Game Developers Conference is Jeff Vogel, who makes RPGs in the style of an Ultima, say, gave a talk about his career, and a lot of it had to do with, well, I've been making these sort of niche and fairly ugly, really, by modern standards, RPGs, turn-based RPGs for 25 years or whatever it is, and have managed to maintain that because I have an audience who wants that, and it's big enough to support this very small team that I'm working with, which is basically 2 people and some contracting for art every now and again. My point being, there's right, people who make things have to eat, and so if you're going to pursue these sorts of niches, you have to make sure it's a niche big enough to support however many people you need to support to be able to eat and pay rent and keep roofs over their houses and things like that. So we may never see a return to these sorts of styles in AAA. We will not see, absolutely, I would say, a return to quite this kind of style. But that doesn't mean that a very small group couldn't do it. So, yeah, it's always a possibility if they can find enough people who share that taste. So, again, well, thanks for the emails there, and I hope we at least touched on your questions to a reasonable degree. We have not yet decided what we're doing next, so you're going to have to keep an eye on us at Twitter at DevGameClub, and hopefully we'll come up with that answer pretty soon.
Yeah, we have
maybe too many thoughts. Yeah, we had way too much discussion tonight before we recorded, so now we're getting really late. So, keep an eye out, and hopefully we'll have something. We also have a couple of possible bonus episodes and maybe interviews in the works, so that's also maybe on the horizon. So we're figuring it out kind of live right now. So we'll let you know. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville, and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And, of course, as I mentioned, the podcast at DevGameClub. Thanks so much for listening, and good night.
Good night.